We are going to get started now. Thank you for everyone who's here now, and I'm sure some people will be joining us shortly as well. But first and foremost, my name is Michael Fetter, and I'm the Director of Communications for Our Soldiers Speak. I'm very happy to have so many of you joining us for OSS's new webinar initiative, Israel Now. Before beginning, I wanted to let everyone know that Our Soldiers Speak is holding its regional conference in Manhattan on March 6th. This regional conference will feature keynote presentations by Colonel Dan Goldfuss, commander of a confidential unit in the infantry of the IDF, as well as Deputy Surgeon General Tarif Badr. Each will speak about his role and work, and then speak in conversation with Tony Badran, research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and Dr. David Samadi, chief of robotic surgery at Lenox Hill Hospital, respectively. This will be a phenomenal event, and we're really excited. Tickets are limited. There's going to be a link for more information at the end of this presentation, as well as sent to you in our follow-up emails. So if you're interested, definitely keep your eyes open for that. At Our Soldiers Speak, our focus is to convene briefings for select audiences at leading high schools, college campuses, graduate schools, and for members of the United States Congress. We focus on key areas of law, diplomacy, high-tech, international security, human rights, and media. We have dispatched uniformed active specialist IDF officers to over 350 campuses, including every one of the Ivy Leagues and other top-tier colleges as well. Our high school curriculum is now studied by over 2,000 Jewish students, and there is much more to come. With the Israel Now webinar series, we're now excited to be able to bring professional and in-depth analysis of Israel and the Middle East to you at your convenience. Today, I'm excited to introduce Yaakov Lappin, military analyst and correspondent for the Jerusalem Post and contributor to Jane's Defense Weekly. Yaakov provides detailed coverage and analysis of Israel's defense and national security prisms. He enjoys top-level access to military decision makers and field commanders, and authored The Virtual Caliphate, a study of the indoctrination, recruitment, and operational training conducted by jihadist networks over the internet. He holds a BA in Politics and Modern History from the University of Manchester and an MA in the History of International Relations from the London School of Economics. Yaakov's going to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes discussing the Syrian civil war and its regional effects on Israel. You're encouraged, like I said, to submit questions and comments, the box on the right, or to me by email or text message. And as we go through, we're going to try to answer that towards the end. We have a sharp deadline today at 1:45 in the afternoon Eastern Standard Time. So Yaakov will speak for, like I said, about 20 minutes, and we'll have about 20 more minutes for conversation as well. For some context, the Syrian civil war started in 2011 and has raged on for just under 5 years. The unofficial death toll is over 250,000 people, and there are over 3 million refugees fleeing Syria and over 6.5 million displaced within Syria itself. While all of these numbers are terrifying in and of themselves, their effects on the world, and more specifically the Middle East, are being felt day to day. With that, I present Mr. Lappin, and I'm going to hand it over to him now. So Yaakov, if you want to just test the microphone, and we'll get started.
Okay. Am I heard? Can everybody hear me clearly?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Go ahead.
Perfect. Okay. Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for that introduction, Michael. I want to speak to you about a topic that in many ways is more than just about Syria, even though this is a huge story, the biggest story in the world as far as I can tell right now. But it's more than that. I want to tell you briefly about a story in which a country falls apart, it ceases to exist, and it's part of a wider regional shift of countries that are falling apart and they're being replaced by organizations, and in which radical Islamic organizations are replacing governments and militaries. We're talking about a tectonic shift in the Middle East, and Syria is the most obvious example of that, but it's not the only example. There are other states that have fallen apart, Libya, Yemen. There are states that are hovering on the brink of falling apart. So what I'm talking to you about now is Syria and how it affects Israel, but a lot of these things have a much wider influence, regional and global. And having said that, let's take the time that we have and launch straight into the things that have been going on here in Israel, and especially here on the northern border. I'm just going to try and move my slide. Okay, so let's begin with the facts. There's no such thing as Syria anymore. It's a country that does not exist. I know that it still appears on world maps, but those maps are out of date. Okay, if you open an atlas and it says Syria, you're looking at something that is a picture of something that once was. It no longer exists. If you look at this map quickly, this is a shifting map. Constantly territory is moving in between hands of various organizations. The Assad regime barely controls a third of what was previously Syria, not more than a third. And the rest is being fought over by dozens of armed organizations. A lot of them are jihadist terrorist organizations with very bad intentions. Some of them are more moderate. But the most important thing is that there's no such thing as Syria anymore. It just does not exist. And in fact, the Arab nation state is really a concept that belongs to the 20th century. As we move into the 21st century, what's becoming clear is that the concept of an Arab nation state is under huge challenge, and it may not survive the 21st century the way things are looking. So Syria has become Syria's. It's multiple entities, and now let's take a look. For those of you who can see my slide, and for those who can't, I'll share all of the information that I've gathered from my talks with people in military intelligence, with people in the IDF Northern Command, and all of the people who are in charge with watching this and preparing for what may come. So, as Michael correctly noted, we're after 5 years of very intense warfare within Syria. I would not even call it a civil war anymore because so many external parties are involved. We've got over 300,000 casualties. That's 1% of the whole of the Syrian population. It's a horrendous humanitarian statistic. And we've got over 10 million Syrians that are displaced. They're homeless. Millions of them are outside of the country. A lot of them are destabilizing Syria's neighbors, Lebanon and Jordan. Turkey has taken in over 2.5 million Syrians. So this is the biggest refugee crisis that the world has seen since the Second World War. Okay, and Syria has crumbled into these multiple sub-state entities, and it's ruled by these organizations. And as I said at the beginning, the Assad regime, you know, President Assad, that's his title officially, and he still gets a salary for being president, but he's not president of Syria anymore. He's president of perhaps Damascus and a few other urban areas on the Syrian coastline, on the northwestern Syrian coastline, and that's about it. He's not president of the rest of the country. Now, the first thing that you hear when you talk to people in the Israeli defense establishment is that Syria cannot be glued back together. You know, it's the old Humpty Dumpty story. It's fallen apart, and nobody who I speak to, nobody in intelligence, nobody in Northern Command, no analysts can see this situation coming back together. Too much blood has been spilled. It's become a sectarian warfare between Shiites and Sunnis. And there's too much bad blood, way too many people have been killed and tortured and executed and bombed, including unconventional weapons, chemical weapons. So nobody can see any sect within Syria willing to forgive these acts by the other sect. Nobody in Israel can see Syria coming back together again. Now let's take a quick look at the main actors and forces. Okay, I've grouped these under axes. The first axis that's very prominent in Syria is the Iranian-led radical axis. Now, this is made up of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. This is the elite Iranian military entity. They have a unit called the Quds Force, which operates outside of Iran, and this is the force that's on the ground in Syria, overseeing ground operations, trying to save the Assad regime. Their interest, Iran's interest, is for the Assad regime to survive. Now, alongside that are Hezbollah, who are also Shiites, and alongside Hezbollah are a bunch of Shiite militias that Iran has brought in from all over the Middle East, from Afghanistan and other areas to try and fight for Assad. On the other side, fighting this entity are the Salafi jihadist Sunni organizations. These are radical organizations. ISIS is the most notorious one, and we'll get to them in a moment. Then there is the Al-Nusra Front, which belongs to Al-Qaeda. And these days, Al-Qaeda is no longer the most radical force in Syria, and I think that fact speaks for itself. And then we have a host of Islamist militias. These are more sort of Muslim Brotherhood oriented. They're not Al-Qaeda, they're not ISIS. These are some of them backed by Turkey and by the Gulf states. We also have a whole group of nationalist democratic armed rebels. Some of them are backed by the United States. Now, above all of this mess, we have a U.S.-led air coalition. It's bombing targets in Syria every day. And if the airspace was not crowded enough before then, we also have the Russian Air Force that is now intensively bombing targets all over Syria. So not only is the ground filled with fighting in Syria in every direction from multiple players, the air is filled with competing rival air forces. And of course, the Syrian Air Force itself is very active all over Syria. Now, if we're looking at this situation from Israel, the first thing that we are looking at in Israel is how has this influenced Hezbollah? And the reason that this is the first question in Israel is because Hezbollah is the foremost military conventional threat to Israel. In southern Lebanon, which is Hezbollah's home base, Hezbollah has over 120,000 surface-to-surface rockets and missiles. So, I mean, that kind of firepower puts it fourth or fifth in the world after some of the major powers in terms of its firepower. And what's happened is that Hezbollah has been drawn in, it's been sucked into Syria, neighboring Syria. It's there fighting ISIS and fighting the rebels because it's worried that ISIS, if it's not stopped in Syria, it's going to move into Lebanon and attack it, which it already has through several car bombs and other forms of attacks. So right now, Hezbollah has 7,000 fighters in Syria. They're fighting for the Assad regime. It has lost so far 1,300 casualties. That's twice as many fighters that it lost against Israel in 2006 during the Second Lebanon War. It sustained 10,000 injuries, which is enormous because Hezbollah's conscripted fighting force is 20,000. So you're looking at half of its conscripted force has been injured. And yet, despite this enormous damage and the drain on resources, Hezbollah hasn't stopped for 1 minute building up its force in southern Lebanon against Israel. That remains its top focus. You know, if Hezbollah commander has to decide whether to shift a fighter to Syria or to southern Lebanon to be on war readiness for Israel, he's going to move him to southern Lebanon first. And only after that would he be prepared to consider moving him to Syria. So Hezbollah has moved into southern Syria because, as I've said, Syria has broken down. So that means that the Syrian-Lebanese border no longer exists. It's not a border that exists. Hezbollah exists on both sides of that border. And what that means for Israel is that if we end up in a conflict situation with Hezbollah in the future, we would have to take into account the fact that Hezbollah could attack Israel not only from Lebanon, where it traditionally builds up its military force, but also from Syria. And that means that the front against Hezbollah has expanded. And this is something that Israel has to take into consideration. Now, the IRGC, this is Iran's unit that we mentioned, is very heavily involved in Syria, and it is using that presence in Syria to do two things that are disturbing for Israel. The first is to traffic weapons from Syria into Lebanon for Hezbollah. Now, these kinds of illegal weapons trafficking is happening all the time, and Israel keeps a very close eye. According to foreign reports, when Israel identifies a very advanced form of weapon moving from Syria to Lebanon, it will reportedly take action and launch an airstrike against that kind of activity. So the IRGC is not only there fighting for Assad, it's also taking advantage of the chaos to further arm Hezbollah, which is Iran's proxy. Now, it's also doing something else which has been a problem for Israel, and that is it's using its presence in southern Syria to try and set up a base of operations, a base to be able to fire rockets into Israel, a base to recruit Syrian Druze to try and plant bombs. And when Israel noticed that this has happened, it didn't hesitate at all. It simply struck the base, according to a number of reports, some of which the IDF has never confirmed. There have been a number of airstrikes targeting IRGC bases in southern Syria, sending a very clear message that Israel is not going to sit on its hands and watch Iran set up a terrorist base in southern Syria. That's something that Israel will not tolerate. It's a red line, and it's been enforced repeatedly. So the question is whether the IRGC will take the hint and stop trying to do that, or will it take its chances and try again, in which case it should expect exactly the same thing from Israel. So this is an area that is of concern, but it's also an area where Israel has made it very clear that it will not hesitate to use force to try and stop the Iranian attempt to exploit its presence in Syria to create a terrorism base. And just a month ago, a Lebanese terrorist by the name of Samir Kuntar, who some of you may have read about, he was killed in an airstrike that reports attributed to Israel. Kuntar, who carried out a horrendous atrocity in the early 80s, killing an Israeli family, he was released as part of a prisoner exchange deal, and he eventually moved to Syria. And he became an Iranian agent, and he set up an Iranian control center where he tried to set up a bombing and rocket base in southern Syria, and he was killed in an airstrike. So that's another indication of where Iran's activities in Syria cross an Israeli red line, and Israel refusing to accept those activities very clearly. Now let's look at the other side of the map. Iran's enemy, Hezbollah's enemy, Assad regime's enemy, and Israel's enemy, ISIS. I hope that this is not going to confuse too many people. It is a confusing situation, but ISIS is everybody's enemy, and it has 20 to 30,000 members in Syria. The closest ISIS position to Israel right now is 40 kilometers away. I know you guys in the U.S. use miles. What is that? I think it's about 26 miles. And ISIS right now is fighting absolutely everybody. It is fighting other jihadists, Sunnis. It is fighting moderate rebels. It's fighting Hezbollah. It's fighting the Assad regime. And it's ideologically committed to attacking Israel. It has already made that very clear. Its leader, Bakr al-Baghdadi, has vowed to attack Israel. And ISIS's ideology is to set up a caliphate right now and to target anybody who they don't like, Shiites, destroy their civilians. This is its ideology. And if anyone's wondering, the reason they don't get along with Al-Qaeda is because Al-Qaeda's ideology is to set up the caliphate in stages and not to target Shiite civilians because they think it's counterproductive. So this is the reason that they're fighting one another as well. Now, ISIS specializes in combined attacks. That means sending suicide car bombs, rockets, cross-border raids. These are the things that Israel is going to have to get ready for, and we'll talk about Israeli preparations in just a moment. And right on Israel's border, ISIS has an affiliate organization. This is not core ISIS. This is an affiliate. It's called the Al Yarmouk Martyrs Brigade. They've sworn allegiance to ISIS in October of last year. They're located about 10 to 15 kilometers from the Israeli Golan Heights. This is an organization that has tanks, armored personnel carriers, shoulder-fired missiles. It's approximately 600 members, and they're armed to the teeth. Israel's keeping a very close eye on this organization. Now, let's take a quick look at the al-Nusra front. This is Al-Qaeda. It's 8 to 12,000 people. A lot of them are in the Syrian Golan Heights, which is right next to the Israel Golan Heights. Something like 20% of them are foreigners and 80% are locals. Now, the foreigners are more likely to pick a fight with Israel because they have less to lose. They're less committed to their area. They don't have family members here, so they're more reckless. And the local members, despite the fact that we're talking about Al-Qaeda, have been reluctant to attack Israel because they're deterred by Israeli firepower for now, and they view Israel as a strong and unpredictable country, so they're not interested in attacking Israel at this stage. Now, Al-Qaeda's main fight right now is with ISIS on the border with Israel. The Israeli security personnel are watching ISIS and Al-Qaeda assassinate one another's leaders 400 meters from the border. They're using car bombs. They're using roadside bombs. They're firing missiles and artillery at one another. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are fighting on Israel's border. That's the situation that we have today. Now, I'd like to take you through some of the key Israeli responses. First of all, military intelligence. This is the entity within the IDF that is responsible for keeping track of everything. And, 6 years ago, it had a job that was relatively straightforward. When it came to Syria, it had to know what the regime was thinking, and it had to know what the military could do, what the Syrian military could do. Today, its job is much harder. Instead of keeping track of one entity and looking at the leadership and the muscle, it has to monitor dozens of armed organizations, and a lot of them are springing up all the time. It's an incredibly dynamic picture. They have a map of Syria that's changing every day. They have to know all of the organizations what their capabilities are, what their intentions are, and they can't be caught off guard, because if an organization springs up and it hasn't been monitored and it decides to attack Israel, the IDF will have a problem knowing how to respond, where to respond if military intelligence hadn't done its homework. So that means that military intelligence has grown in size to keep up with the new reality in Syria. The complex intelligence work means that a lot of the tactics have changed. It's become much more high-tech. And it means that the Northern Command has to prepare for things that it hasn't had to prepare for in the past, like infiltrations, rockets, guided missiles, bomb-laden armored vehicles, and all of those things happening at once. It has to prepare for all of those threats to make sure that the northern civilians in the Golan Heights are safe from these range of threats. Now, a year and a half ago, the IDF established a new division on the Golan Heights. It's called Division 210, and this division is specifically tasked with rapidly containing and responding to Syrian cross-border attacks. Separately from that, the IDF has trained in ground maneuvers. Perhaps one day would have to be moved into Syria on a limited basis. Although the Israeli wishes not to get involved in the Syrian civil war, the IDF has to get ready for that nonetheless. And one of the interesting things that have happened from a military perspective is that commanders, field commanders in the IDF, who once had to get permission from their superiors to take any kind of significant action, today have much greater autonomy. The reason for that is because the IDF realizes that it's not facing a set army anymore. It's facing a much faster enemy. And that means that the field commanders, the battalion commanders, they have to be able to respond to what they see. They won't have the time to call in and wait for instructions. By that time, the attack will be over. So just like the enemy has become decentralized, the IDF is trying to reflect that and become more flexible and decentralized itself so that it's better shaped and adapted to deal with this enemy. And this is a very difficult, painful process for any conventional military to do. The U.S. military has exactly the same challenge when it comes to dealing with asymmetrical warfare anywhere like Iraq or Afghanistan, or if they get involved in the future in other places. It's the same challenge facing every Western military. But the IDF is in the heart of this, and it's going to have to deal with this on a regular basis. So it's already begun very quickly making these changes, becoming more and more decentralized, amongst other things. Let's see if I can get the slide moving. It seems to have, there we go. Now, quickly, I want to touch on the fact that the things that are happening in Syria are having a direct effect on Palestinians right here on our doorstep. Today, about 3 hours ago, two Israelis who were shopping in a supermarket in the Binyamin region of the West Bank. They were stabbed by 14-year-old Palestinians, two of them. They were just doing their shopping, and suddenly the knives came out. These 14-year-olds went on a stabbing spree. One is in moderate to serious condition in the hospital, and the other one is moderately injured. It could have been much worse, and the two attackers were shot and injured by an armed civilian who was on the scene. We have seen almost weekly stabbing and car ramming attacks. Now, where is this idea for stabbing Jews coming from? Partly, not exclusively, but partly it is coming from the ISIS propaganda videos that are washing over social media. This is having a direct influence on the Palestinian mindset. They see the knife, they see the execution videos, they see the calls to destroy the infidel, and this puts ideas into their heads. And this is definitely part of the reason why we're seeing constant stabbing spree attacks over here in Israel. This is a direct knock-on effect, and it's a warning sign. A lot of people have asked me what the Russian intervention means for Israel, and to sum it up in a nutshell, it's really a mixed bag. I mean, on the one hand, there's the threat that a mistake could be made and a Russian jet could accidentally cross into Israeli airspace. Well, that's actually happened twice already. And Israel is not going to shoot down a Russian jet. It's just not going to happen. Nobody wants to shoot down a Russian jet. Trust me on this one. It's not something anybody wants to do. They're not an enemy of Israel. They're not interested in harming Israel, so they're not tagged on Israel's radar screens as an enemy jet. So even if it crosses, it's not going to be shot down. But there is a need for the Russian and the Israeli Air Forces to establish hotlines and make sure that there are no misunderstandings. Now, recently I've heard things in the IDF that are actually quite interesting. even though Russia is backing Assad and working with Hezbollah and the IRGC, and that is a problem for Israel, clearly. But on the other hand, because there's this major power in the area, and it's engaging with Hezbollah, it may have a restraining influence on Hezbollah. It may talk Hezbollah out of doing something that could prove to be reckless and could spark another incident that could snowball into a conflict with Israel. And Russia wants Hezbollah fighting for Assad. It does not want Hezbollah getting into a war with Israel. So that surprisingly could turn out to be a moderating influence on Hezbollah. And that's just one example of how this area is constantly coming up with surprises and changes. So we talked about some of the concerns and opportunities for Israel.
Yaakov, I'm actually going to interrupt for just a second. I just want to make sure we have a lot of really great questions coming in too. So if you want to take another 60 seconds, a minute and a half to kind of go through what the rest is, and we'll just so that we can get to everybody's questions. Thanks so much.
Sounds great. Okay, so strategic concerns. Okay, if the Russians continue helping the Assad regime gain ground, then what could happen is that the Iran-led axis could emerge with this sense of triumph, and they could become overconfident, and that could translate into aggression against Israel. And that is a problem that Israel is going to have to monitor. On the other hand, it's not all doom and gloom. There are rebels who are moderate out there, and Israel has an opportunity to work with them, to form low-key partnerships with moderate elements in Syria, not necessarily even rebels, communities. And that's a new opportunity. And we can't talk about Syria without talking about the humanitarian catastrophe. We've already mentioned it, but what does Israel do if 10,000 Syrian refugees arrive on its border? Well, this is a problem. It's a dilemma. It's not clear what Israel's going to do. There is a plan in action right now. The current plan is that if Israel gets word of a massacre that may happen on its border, it's not going to sit by and watch. As a Jewish country that rose out of the ashes of the Holocaust, Israel couldn't live with the idea that it's going to watch a massacre of civilians right on the border. So if it got word of that, it's going to send its military forces over the border into Syria. It's going to form a protective shield over the civilians, and it's going to make sure that they get all the humanitarian and military protection that they need to avoid death in those circumstances. Now, already Israel has treated thousands of Syrians in Israeli hospitals, and it's feeding and giving blankets and every kind of imaginable humanitarian help is arriving to the southern Syrian villages. Is that enough? That's a topic that's being hotly debated in Israel. I think that we're going to move now into questions and answers, and I welcome all questions.
All right, perfect. Once again, thank you so much, Yaakov, for all of that. I personally found that incredibly both enlightening and informative. It's interesting how events of today have led to so many opinions as well as understandings and objects of information. We did have a lot of really wonderful questions coming in, and I'm just going to start going through them. I know that you've answered some of these from certain aspects and perspectives, but I'd like you to just readdress them and sort of answer people's questions at the same time. Also, just before starting, if anybody's listening on the phone, you should feel free to write in your question to the email address michael.oursoldiersspeak@gmail.com, and we'll try to reach that as also within the time that we have. Okay, so Yaakov, the first question that we have, and again, you had addressed some of this, but there's a lot of questions coming in about Russia specifically. The question, this question is from Pamela. The Russian presence in Syria puts a whole new spin on security concerns. How can Israel avoid confrontation with Russia when the Russians start directly limiting Israel's access to fly over Syria and Lebanon?
Okay, very good question. I'll start with the good news. Russia is not limiting Israel's access to flyover in Syria. Part of the agreement that the two governments and then afterwards the militaries have reached is that neither side is going to limit the other side. What does that mean if we translate it into reality and not just a theory? It means that Russia is going to carry on bombing wherever it likes, and it means that if in theory Israel wants to gather intelligence over this area, or if it wants to strike, say, a weapons trafficking attempt in this area, Russia's not going to get in Israel's way, and Israel's not going to get in Russia's way. That is the situation right now, and the hope is that this continues. So far, it's looking better than it could have gone. It could have gone in a different direction, but right now the two militaries have agreed to really stay out of one another's way, and I think that that's good news.
That's great. Thank you. The next question actually comes in from Eric, and he said that you had talked about the concept of the Arab nation state is not viable in the 21st century. His question is, does this include all countries, including Egypt and Iran, with whom Israel has agreements and treaties already? And if so, what are those implications? What does that mean for Israel and the region itself?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, if you ask people who are in the defense establishment, they may say that they can see really only 4 countries in the Middle East that are real countries. By real, they mean historical, the trees with deep roots that have been around for a long time. And they would name Egypt, they would name Turkey, they would name Iran. And there's a debate whether now you can add Saudi Arabia to that or not. But every other country really in this region was created in the 20th century with arbitrary lines drawn up by the French and the British, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and that concept is falling apart. People don't identify themselves anymore as, Jordanians or Syrians. They're much more interested in talking about themselves as Sunnis or Shiites or what tribe they're from. So this is a breakdown. Now, Egypt, fortunately, is one of those countries that's historically deep. And it's not the kind of country that's going to fall tomorrow. It may experience instability, but it's not going to fall apart in the same way Syria or Libya have. But other countries could. And, Jordan is one of those countries that Israel has a firm interest in making sure that it stays stable and strong. But nobody can guarantee, nobody can sign a guarantee that Jordan is going to be here in 5 years in the way that we see it today. So it means that whatever you see today may not be here tomorrow, and Israel has to be prepared for all eventualities, which means, for example, in Jordan's case, building a new security fence with Jordan, because we just don't know who will be there in 5 years. And it also means countries that are currently, say, rational, who are buying up hundreds of billions of Western military platforms and hardware. We don't know who might be running those countries in 4 or 5 years, so we have to prepare for that as well. It means really preparing for anything.
Great. The next question that came in, it came in without a name. The question is, what is the IDF assessment of the combat experience gained by Hezbollah in Syria versus the new IDF recruits they would likely face in another war with Israel?
What a question. Hezbollah in Syria is getting more experience than it's ever had before. In Syria, Hezbollah is turning into an army. It used to be a terrorist guerrilla force. It is still those things, but in Syria, it's also an army. It does all the things that an army does. It does command and control. It takes territory. It gathers intelligence and then uses that to strike targets. Those are the things that an army does. So Hezbollah is an army as well. What does that mean? It means that if Israel gets into a conflict with Hezbollah in the future, then we're going to have to take into account the fact that they don't only fire rockets at us, that they send over highly trained war veterans, Syrian war veterans, into the Galil, into northern Israel, and they launch cross-border raids, and they know how to do that. They have the capabilities today to do that. What does that mean for the IDF? It means that the IDF spends all of its time, free time that is, training against Hezbollah. The new Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot, he's put war readiness and training as the top priority for the IDF. He's pushed down so many other things that used to be at the top of the priority list. Those are much lower down. War training and war readiness are the top of the list here. And I think that the soldier who comes out of the next 2-3 years, comes out of the IDF, is going to be much better trained for that kind of warfare than soldiers that have previously been drafted in recent years.
Got it. Actually, thank you so much. The next question, I'm just going to keep kind of moving through questions here. So the next question that we have is from Stephen. Stephen asks, and he points out that Iran has recruited several thousand multinational forces to fight in Syria. An international combination of Afghani, Pakistani, Africans such as Somalis, etc., and some are even paid mercenaries. There are then, there's then a growing Shiite militant force. Since Hezbollah has suffered so many losses in Syria, do you see Iran building up this kind of foreign legion in Lebanon as a threat to Israel, or is it going to stay sort of self-contained?
Well, in Lebanon, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen, but what we can say right now is that in Lebanon today, Hezbollah is the unrivaled military power within the state of Lebanon. There's no organization that can rival or come close to Hezbollah in Lebanon. They dominate Lebanon militarily and politically. I mean, what that means is that there's no need for, Hezbollah doesn't have a need for any Shiite militias to move in and help it. They're very powerful in Lebanon. They're far more powerful than the Lebanese armed forces and any other organization. So as of now, that's not necessary. If in the future, this looks to me unlikely, but if ISIS succeeds in somehow gaining actual cells and units and moving them from Syria into Lebanon, which is what it would like to do, then perhaps Hezbollah could, ask for some help. But again, that seems far-fetched to me right now because ISIS is very bogged down in Syria. They can launch a bomb attack, but they can't take territory in Lebanon. So I would say right now, Hezbollah's position in Lebanon is pretty assured.
Got it. Thank you. I know that I'm going to put some questions actually together now, and I know this is something that we've actually talked about before, but still remains a question on my mind. A question. I'll go with this specific question to kind of lead it off and open it up a little more. The question that came in, one of them was, what is, with Putin's attitude toward Netanyahu's delineation of Israel's red lines for Russian involvement in Syria. I'm sorry. Not only am I reading the wrong question, I'm reading it wrong. I apologize to the person who asked that question. I actually really do want to get, before time's out, to a different question in the larger stance here. The question that came in was also about Russia, but in regards to how Russia's allegiance to its allies, specifically Syria, is being viewed by Israelis in contrast to the perceived shakiness of the U.S. towards its allies. And this person even added in, as best demonstrated by the ouster of Mubarak in Egypt. And the larger extension of this is, with everything going on the borders, with everything going on both inside Syria, Lebanon, Hezbollah happening to be moving in, ISIS on the borders as well now, you have Russia being involved so close by once again. How are Israelis feeling on the ground in a day-to-day? What is the Israeli experience right now? And how is that manifesting in politics, international relations, as well as internal politics as well?
Okay, let's start with the first question. A lot of Israelis think that, however they may feel about what Putin is doing, and I think a lot of very uncomfortable with the mass bombing in Syria, but certainly they see the Russian leadership as a leadership that does what it says, and it's a leadership that puts its stock into its word, and this is viewed with a certain amount of respect. There's no question about it. And there's definitely a desire by some Israelis for an American leadership that would be equally strong and committed to the region, to its allies. And really, I think this is not limited to Israelis alone. I think America's Arab allies, at least in the government level, have exactly the same desire for a strong American leadership. And I'm not talking about getting bogged down into wars or anything like that. I'm talking about sort of a clear commitment to the allies, at least in a way that matches the Russian commitment. I think that's something that ordinary Israelis, definitely a lot of them, would want to see. Now, the second question, if I recall, was how is all the instability and chaos in Syria affecting daily life in Israel? Well, the fact of the matter is it's not. And sometimes it's really surreal. As a military correspondent, I follow very closely what happens in Syria. But the truth of the matter is that when you wander around Israel, you wouldn't know. It might as well be happening on a different planet in terms of direct influence. If you're living on the Golan Heights, really close to the border, you can hear the artillery, you can hear the shooting. That's true, the people living there. But if you're in Tel Aviv or anywhere else in the country, you see it on the news just like you do anywhere else. Now, when does that change? It changes the minute that ISIS or Hezbollah or the IRGC launches an attack. Then it becomes very tangible. But until then, it seems distant from central Israel, and it really is. It's sometimes surreal because it's very close. These events are a 4-hour drive from where I'm sitting right now in south of Tel Aviv. These events are actually close, but they don't feel close if you're in Israel on a daily basis. How does it affect Israelis' views of the region? I think was the third question. Well, I think it really sort of undermines the faith in things like stability. A lot of Israelis say, well, okay, if the region's falling apart and we sign a peace deal with the Palestinian Authority, who's going to promise us that they'll be there tomorrow? If a Palestinian state gets set up now, who's going to promise us that ISIS or Hamas won't be the ones who are running it tomorrow? Because again, states are falling apart and radical Islamic organizations are taking their place. Why wouldn't that happen in a Palestinian state? It already happened in Gaza. Why wouldn't it happen in a Palestinian state in the West Bank? So there's a lot less faith and support in the idea of a real diplomatic process right now. It's undermining Israelis' trust in any idea of diplomatic solutions right now, I think, to the Palestinian problem.
All right, that's great. Yaakov, I want to say thank you very much. We're running basically right up against time right now, and there's a few different announcements that I want to make. But Yaakov, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who joined a little late or are still unaware, Israel Now is Our Soldiers Speak new webinar, and we're going to do this monthly now. Yaakov will be with us basically every other month, and we'll be joined also by Amir Tibon, another Israeli journalist and correspondent, and he'll be speaking most likely next month. More information will come out about that as we move forward and get closer. I also, just as some side notes before even getting to what the next slide is right now, for those of you who don't know or have loved what you just heard from Yaakov, he'll actually be touring with Our Soldiers Speak in the United States this coming fall. If you're interested in more information and having him come to speak to your community, to different locations, feel free to reach out to oss@oursoldierspeak.org. So for more information about Yaakov coming to the States and speaking, you can find out by emailing oss@oursoldierspeak.org. Finally, as you can see, if you're here with us online, you can see our last slide here. We have our regional conference coming. It's going to be on March 6th. Tickets are limited. It's going to be an incredible, incredible conference. It's featuring Colonel Dan Goldfuss from a confidential unit, as well as Colonel Dr. Tarif Badr, who's the Deputy Surgeon General. Colonel Dr. Badr is starting his tour this coming week. He'll be going around to different med schools and talking about what it means to be the Deputy Surgeon General, his work in Nepal, his work in Haiti, and as well with Syrian refugees and Syrian combatants that are coming over the border. Colonel Dan Goldfuss will be coming to speak about the following week, and he'll be speaking about Hezbollah in a 10-year analysis, looking backwards, looking forwards. At this regional conference, they'll both be speaking about what it is that they do, how it's affecting the world these days, and then they'll also follow by being in dialogue with Tony Badran and Dr. David Samadi, and it's just going to be fantastic. You can find out more at www.oursoldierspeak.org/regional. Again, that's www.oursoldierspeak.org/regional, and we'll also be reaching out by email after this conference in the next 24 hours with more information about this. Once again, Yaakov, thank you so much for being here and joining us. For everyone that was able to attend, thank you for taking time out of your day, and we hope to see you next month in this, and we hope to see you at a regional conference in just the coming weeks. All right, Yaakov, again, have a good evening, a good night. It's late for you, and for everyone else, thank you so much.
Thank you for everybody who joined us.